Welcome and hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's session is going to be focused on the new Mitigating Against Educational Disadvantage Fund, which we're obviously all delighted about, and we have the second iteration now in place for 2021. We have a very busy agenda today. I'm just going to share my screen and show you. So we have Claire Wynne from SOLAS, who's the manager for FET Operational Support. Martha Bulger, who is the Director of FET for Kilkenny and Carlow ETBI. So Martha is representing both Kilkenny and Carlow ETB and also ETBI today. And we also are joined by Olwen Dixon from Little Bray Family Resource Centre and Eve Cobain from AONTAS as well. So we have a very busy schedule, as you can see. We're going to go through inputs from SOLAS and ETBI. We're very lucky to have those guests, as I said. We will also look at the impact of the MED fund from last year and the amazing support system that it was. Then we will have an outline of the funding that's available this year, the categories, some of the information that hopefully will help you in your application. And as I said, we'll then have a great input from Olwen, where she'll share her experience of being successful in the fund last year. And then we'll go into breakout rooms, which will be the most important part, where people can share their experiences, ask each other questions, and identify everybody's needs. We will go through everything. We'll have a number of resources available afterwards, but if you have any questions, the main thing is to get as much information as you can today. We'll take note of all the questions, any support that you need. I will get back to everybody in the next few days. So some of the questions obviously will be quite specific, so you'll need that one-to-one link in, and then others that are general, hopefully we'll be able to go through those things with you. So that's kind of the main point on that. So I'll happily pass you over to Claire Wynne now from SOLAS.
Thanks, Dearbháil. Just checking that you can hear me okay. Yep, okay, thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to meet with you and to speak today, and albeit that we're doing it virtually. I just want to say a particular thanks to AONTAS for organising the webinar and for the work done in this particular area. I think we, just to reflect back to November last year, when the Minister made the announcement in regard to the funding for mitigating against educational disadvantage, it was a very welcome fund that we received. 8 million was the announcement. It did present its challenges in the fact that we had 2 months in which to try and maximise the use of this particular fund. And I want to pay particular thanks to all of you for, I suppose, the work done and all the stops that was pulled out to make it happen. I also want to pay particular thanks to Martha and our colleagues in the ETBs who administered the open call, getting the word out, working through the various applications. It culminated in over 500 requests for funding that came through, which I think is a very positive response, particularly as we said, we're conscious of the timeline that would have been involved in it. When we looked at the categories of those particular fundings and the initiatives within them, it amounted to 750 initiatives, which is 5.8 million, just over 5.8 million was approved for funding. I know AONTAS has done some research in this particular area in terms of the impact of it, and we'll be hearing some more detail about that later on. But the reach there, according to the AONTAS data, suggests that 10,000 beneficiaries benefit from that particular investment and funding in 2020. I think that is just phenomenal from the point of view, and it's a testament to yourselves for the work done in terms of responding where you could to the commitment and the dedication that exists there in terms of supporting learners and in terms of supporting the work of the sector in that particular regard. If we're to think about kind of the strands that were put in there, if we think, I know there was a lot of work building up to get the fund in the first instance there, but the core of this really, as we say, is about addressing educational inequality, and the four strands were looking at it, I suppose, at the time of the pandemic, and also again we're going to talk about the 2021 fund there, and again what the focus is in as we move through this recovery phase. But in terms of the strands that were being focused on, we're looking at, the participation barriers and trying to reduce them down, and particularly, what were particular issues that were being encountered by individuals. And we'll see, I'm just going to talk about the kind of the scale in terms of response around these particular, I suppose, initiatives in this particular regard. And if we were to look at the initiatives in that particular space, 14% of, as I call the 750 initiatives related to this particular space. So it's very much that was around an individual response in that particular regard, and it represented about 10% of the funding that was allocated there. The big countering the digital divide was the bigger piece in there, and building the infrastructure around the continuity of learning, supporting learning, and meeting the diverse needs of learners there. Needless to say, that was the biggest portion of the funding and the biggest portion of the initiatives there. So 70% of the funding was allocated in that particular space, and for that particular purpose, representing about 59% of the initiatives. The COVID-specific measures were probably the smaller amount in terms of funding, so they were about 7% and about 11% of the initiatives there. The awareness raising is very important, just getting the message out that you were there to try and provide the service and to continue the particular supports in that regard. The 2021 funding and round of funding has been announced. We got confirmation there in July, and again the open call is out there, and I know Marta is going to speak a little bit about this, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the categories again in relation to it, but the funding categories again are very similar to the funding categories that were available in the 2020 round on it there. So again, we're looking at the four strands, which is really around the learner participation and breaking those barriers down. That's very much looking at the individual learner and groups of learners and seeing how we can help them. And particularly, again, we're conscious we're in this recovery stage of the, in a phase of the economy, and, extra, or I suppose additional I suppose challenges are presented to people who are disadvantaged. So how do we manage and how do we support their engagement and continuity with learning on it there? The awareness raising is very important to support re-engagement, to encourage continuity, and even to get the message out that you're still there and supporting. That's really what that particular area of the funding is focused on there. The digital infrastructure, digital technologies, building providers' capabilities, building and encouraging continuity of participation is particularly important, and using, I suppose, the technology to assist where appropriate in that regard. So again, we would probably expect to see a significant amount of funding being allocated in that particular area. And then what we refer to as COVID-specific recovery measures. Really, it's about getting back on track, getting learning back on track, getting delivery back on track post all of these lockdowns, as we kind of work towards the next phase and development of the supports in the particular sector there. So I know, Marta, and there's details later on in terms of the particular dates and contacts. The key thing is it's been managed through your local ETBs, and again, the adult education officers are the key people to make contact with for further information and detail on it there. Again, thank you for the opportunity to address and to speak with you today. I'll hand back to Dearbháil now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Really appreciate that. And obviously we're all absolutely delighted to have the fund. So thank you so much to everybody in Solas who's been working behind closed doors supporting that as well. And I'm delighted to pass you over now to Martha Bulger from ETBI. Thanks, Martha.
Thanks, Dearbháil, and hello and welcome to everyone. And I want to thank AONTAS for organising today's event and really their tireless support for community groups. My name, as introduced earlier, is Martha Bolger, and I'm the Director of FET with Kilkenny and Carlow ETB. And I suppose I'm representing ETBI and the directors of FET today. And as a Director of Further Education and Training, I work with a wide range of community education groups and organisation in both the counties of Kilkenny and Carlow. And I suppose building on that, ETBs, there's 16 ETBs around the country, and at the moment they're inviting applications from community providers and community groups for funding to assist you as community education providers to address the decline in participation of learners in further education and training. As we know, last year was particularly challenging for everybody, and those challenges continued into this year. And I suppose the challenges have impacted everyone, not just learners, but they've impacted in so many different ways. As Claire mentioned, the purpose of this fund, the Mitigating Against Educational Disadvantage, is to assist ETBs to increase their capacity and also the capacity of community education providers and groups to address this decline in participation of what we term disadvantaged learners, particularly those who are disadvantaged around literacy and basic skills programmed and might be coming in at the NFQ levels 1 to 3. The fund really places a strong emphasis on community education, that local transaction happening in the community, as a mechanism to continue to support and engage with disadvantaged learners. As Claire mentioned, it's an open call to ETBs. There is a lot of money, but it's not unlimited, and we have to account for it. Within the 16 ETBs, each ETB has different personnel who are responsible for all their programs. And hence, if you need support other than what AONTAS can give you, you need to check and confirm who is the local person to contact in your ETB area. We've recommended that it would be the adult education officers in each ETB area, but along with this, you also need to check the closing date, as that ETBs have a closing date in which we would return all our recommendations to Solace. But in order to, I suppose, assess the quality of the application, each ETB would be working back from a general date. So please check it. Read the guidelines. Ask your ETB for the documentation and read the guidelines or any additional documentation that the ETB might choose to send. The other thing to remember is that the group, i.e. your group or organisation, needs to commit to spending the money this year. And again, each ETB will have a cut-off point or a deadline as to when the money should be spent by, and then for us, when we report back to Solace. All ETBs would welcome a variety of applications, but really I suppose the ones that will be the strongest are the ones which have learners at the core of the project or the programme. Try to remember what effects COVID has had on your community group and on your local area. What will reignite the sense of community spirit in your area, and what will benefit adult learners in your local district? In case the ETB, I know I look forward to new ideas and innovations coming into the community arena. And really today I want to finish by noting and thanking Solace for their ongoing support in FET, but particularly for community education and initiatives such as the Mitigating Against Disadvantage Fund. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha. That was really clear. And your focus on the learners is exactly what we're all here for. So it's great to hear that. And I think everybody's on the same page in supporting that. We're all very committed to supporting learners across the sector. I'm delighted to pass you now over to Eve Cobain, who is our Senior Research Officer in AONTAS. And Eve is going to give you, as you can see, hopefully on the screen there, a reflective view of the Mitigating Against Educational Disadvantage Fund research that was undertaken last year, to give us that nice overview of the work that was done and what we can learn going forward. Thanks, Eve.
Thanks so much, Dearbháil, and it's great to see so many people here today. So yeah, as Dearbháil said, really the purpose of this input is just going to be to reflect on the input, which has already been mentioned, was really seismic, and then to look at some of the kind of lessons and learnings from that first iteration as well. So as Claire has already highlighted, the scope of the fund was really huge in the first year. 5.8 million was granted to support community education in addressing educational inequality, and it was hugely successful in doing that. And AONTAS, following the distribution of the fund, conducted a survey in January and February of this year to investigate the benefits, and we received a total of 103 responses, which was really quite representative, I suppose, of the full picture. And that was from both ETBs and community education recipients of the fund as well. So to give you a bit of an overview, I suppose, of who was recipients and where they were located, this graph just represents the spread of the fund across Ireland. So as you can see, a lot of groups in Cork, Limerick and Clare were successful, and maybe fewer in Kerry and Kilkenny and Carlow. So we'd hope to see greater kind of uptake there in this iteration. So to go to the impact of the fund, as mentioned by Claire, we estimate that over 10,000 learners across 500 groups were impacted positively by this fund. So that really is huge, and I'm sure in the second iteration it'll be even greater as well. So when we collated all the findings from the research, we kind of drew them into this diagram, which kind of collates the ways in which the fund was beneficial. So you can see here that the fund helped to create safe learning spaces. It helped, very importantly, I think, in the period in which it was issued to address the digital divide. It also helped to build stronger learning communities, and as well, it increased sectoral capacity. And we had fantastic quotes in the open response boxes from our respondents to the survey as well. And one commented that the fund has had an immediate impact on those most affected by COVID-19. So that's obviously what we really wanted to see. And the fund was also described as a game changer, putting recipients in a much stronger position starting 21 than they were previously. So in terms of how the fund was applied or spent, we can see the fund was largely really directed towards online learning and support for ICT. And that's not really surprising considering the very rapid move to online learning and the challenges that learners face in terms of digital poverty and dealing with that digital divide. So the fund was very rightly directed towards that category by many groups. Groups also availed of non-ICT infrastructure and goods, such as transportation. And then there was additional learner supports as well as outreach and additional courses. And I think you'll see from these various categories that some of them were able to address like those COVID specific issues that were very much a product of the moment. And then others were able to address long-standing issues in the sector, which had been really around for a long time in terms of infrastructure. So in terms of applications of the fund, as I said, support for online learning was really a key focus. And the MED fund was able to address, the MED groups were able to access IT devices, software and programs to support online learning and combat digital poverty. And here I've just created a little table that might even give you some ideas when you're applying for the fund yourselves this year of what groups successfully applied for. So digital devices that were made available through the fund included laptops, iPads, tablets, screens, headphones, mice, and so on. So I'm sure many of you will have ideas about what you might want to ask for. And then other purchases to support online learning, which included software, printers, dongles, USB sticks, and such. So that's just an idea of some of the things that groups were applying for and were able to use that were not available prior to the fund. So the availability of laptops in particular, I think, marked a turning point for learners who, as one respondent noted, were struggling with Zoom classes on their phones, which obviously to really engage in learning. And they were able to continue then attending classes using the laptop loan scheme, which was implemented by many groups and hugely successful. And then, as I said, a lot of non-ICT purchases were made as well, and recipients were able to access funding for vital resources to improve their community education provision and provide continued access to learners. So some of these would include learner support packs and stamps as well, because many groups were posting out materials to learners at this time, book tokens and educational resources, general course materials, books for libraries, which again is building that kind of infrastructural support within the sector. And then cookery and sewing equipment for some of the more creative courses. And then obviously PPE and safety equipment was crucial as well in terms of ensuring that those spaces, whenever face-to-face learning was safe to do so, that ensuring that those were protected spaces. And then furniture and office equipment and overall improvements that really enabled groups to improve facilities for the whole community for the long term. So of some groups, and this was less the case than the digital category, but some groups did avail of additional supports for learners, outreach and additional courses. And one respondent noted the fund supported learners in keeping appointments with members of a team through an online platform. Another noted that the fund provided urgent counselling to those requiring early intervention, and obviously in the context of the pandemic, that was very much a need for learners in terms of giving that holistic support. And the fund also helped community education groups to reach out to learners who were disengaged from learning because of challenges associated with the pandemic. And all of our research really does indicate that those challenges were many. So that was a really important aspect of the fund as well. So just in terms, I just want to touch on lessons, some of the lessons we learned from that survey and from the research that we conducted in terms of the administration of the fund. And as has already been highlighted, the time frame was a challenge for both ETBs and community education recipients of the fund. Some of the comments that came through were adjust the time frame for a more realistic target, more time to complete, enabling more support to be available from ETB staff, because obviously the ETB staff really wanted to support this fund as well, and to commence the administration process earlier. In a number of cases, in fact, the limited time frame for spending the monies did result in an underspend for groups who both ETBs and groups worked around the clock to make this possible and to make the funding spend possible. And this has been largely addressed, I think, and this is a huge positive I suppose outcome in that we have seen the time frame be extended this year, and I think that will make it much more feasible for groups to kind of apply for what they need, and it'll make it easier for the ETBs as well. So we're really glad to see that. In terms of information guidelines, it was mentioned that there was a need for assistance and training to external groups, so those not funded by the ETB, in completing and managing the application process, along with identifying the requirements arising from successful applications. And we can see as well that this has been addressed in terms of a number of ETBs very positively, such as Cork. I'll uphold them as an example, who are running information sessions. And then in terms of the flexibility of the fund, this was also a recommendation that came through, that groups would like to see the fund become even broader in scope. And we've noticed as well that there is an additional funding stream for 2022, which is the COVID-19 Recovery Exceptional Circumstances Fund for community education to address educationally disadvantaged learners. And hopefully this will be a really flexible aspect of the fund where groups can apply for particular needs where they may not fit into other categories. So in terms of areas identified for further funding in the last iteration, groups really did want to see additional learner support. So you can see that kind of falling into those categories there. And ICT and hardware, ICT hard and software was still very much a need that groups were expressing even after the fund. So you can just see how important this second iteration of the fund will be in addressing that continued access to ICT devices as well. In terms of areas that groups identified for further funding, they also felt that learner supports were really important. One respondent noted more one-day courses and relaxation activities and resourcing of social supports, for example, health and wellbeing support groups, with funding to purchase learning materials and resources that would be beneficial for their development. And then for program-based support and additional staff, groups mentioned put an emphasis on funding broader lifelong learning, both recreational and QQI classes, with funding made available to pay tutors and additional equipment for learners. and then also operational costs with assistance for everyday costs such as rent, insurance, etc. So to conclude, the first iteration of the fund was felt to be a very welcome boost to the community education sector, and as you can see today, is being equally welcomed this year. And there was the largest number of respondents mentioned an extended time frame as the area that would make the fund even more beneficial, and that has been substantially addressed. So we're delighted to see that. And groups also stated that they hoped a fund would be possible again, highlighting a need for sustained and secured annual funding, which is needed for independent community education providers who work tirelessly for learners and ensure that every opportunity is available to them. So I just want to make a shameless plug as well now at the end of that on the subject of sustainable funding for the sector. We're actually holding a focus group on Friday at 10 a.m. on funding structures and support for community education. So we'd be delighted to have you participate in that discussion. And I believe one of my colleagues will put more information into the chat box now. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you if you're available at 10 a.m. on Friday to take part in that focus group. Thanks very much. Over to you there, Dearbháil.
Thank you so much, Eve. And I think you've really highlighted the importance of research and the importance of the collective advocacy in all of this work. Like everything that we have achieved and gained in the last year with support for the community education sector is with huge thanks to all the members that are here today. And obviously a really important part of that then is engaging in the research and having a strong evidence base to be able to say, this is why we need to be able to fund the sector, and community education has for the majority a cohort of marginalized and vulnerable learners. So I think it's really a strong point to remember that. That engaging in things like the focus group, engaging in the CEN census helps to provide that evidence base which supports our advocacy, and then the advocacy and the representation helps to get the funding, which helps to support that thriving community education sector, which we're all working collectively on. So it's really important to have all of that. So thank you so much, Eve. I'm going to share a screen and kill you all with PowerPoint again. I know it's a lot of information in here today. I'm sorry, guys. The good thing is, though, hopefully it'll help people to take in that information, and then we'll send on the slides afterwards as well. So the Mitigating Educational Disadvantage Fund aims to provide funding to support educationally disadvantaged learners in accessing and participating in community education. So I suppose from the offset, I just want to flag that when you're developing your funding application, that is what you're highlighting, that you're supporting disadvantaged learners. So, even before you begin, it would be really strong to use the CEN census research to have your own profile of learners ready, and to be able to state that this is the core part and this is what we hope to achieve. The fund was launched by the Minister of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, Simon Harris, and it is administered by SOLAS and the 16 ETBs across the country. The fund places a strong focus on community education as a mechanism to continue to support and engage with disadvantaged learners, reaching out, encouraging and supporting learners to re-engage with further education and training, enticing new learners to engage with further education and training opportunities, and enabling the investment in building the digital infrastructure of providers and their capability to ensure that online learning can be delivered in a way that meets the complex needs of learners. So I think all of those points are really important as well when you're thinking about the key questions in the application. What are you trying to achieve? Who are you supporting? And how will you do that? The different funding categories, as Martha mentioned, and Claire, they're quite similar to last year, which is helpful. So if you did apply last year, hopefully you've already done a lot of thinking around that, and you know what worked well and what areas maybe that you need to get more funding in. So there's digital technologies, and that's the supply of devices, software, systems, CPD training to facilitate high quality learning and delivery. And I think just to flag on that, that was one of the areas that was highlighted in the National FET Learner Forum Annual Synthesis Report that many of you would have attended the launch of that recently. The professional development of educators to be able to support the learners on the ground, and having that comfort really and experience being able to do that is really important, I think, as we all know. So I think that's definitely a strong area to focus on. And within that, the capital threshold is based on the cost of any item in excess of €1,000, including VAT. So capital items cannot be funded through this grant. Every ETB will share their own application form And I'll come back to that in a moment, but I suppose it's important to say it's really important that you check the financial regulations and the different conditions with your ETB, as they may have different conditions that are applicable. The Learner Assistance Fund, that's there to help where appropriate with costs associated with course participation, such as books or class materials, outreach, engagement, and the Mentoring Fund to assist with costs associated with activities such as awareness raising and services to promote re-engagement. And re-engagement, I think we all know, due to COVID-19 is more important than ever. And then the COVID-19 Recovery Exceptional Circumstances Fund for community education providers to address educationally disadvantaged learners. So here's just some of the ideas for spending. And this is just a guideline. If you have new innovative ideas, they're totally acceptable as well. If not encouraged, as you've already heard today. So digital technologies, that might be something like the laptop loan scheme, and many of the other groups have already done that. And I think we'll be happily able to share examples of maybe forms and systems, how people did that if you're new to doing it this time around. The CPD training, as I've mentioned, secure relevant software. So that might be something like Zoom, having a paid Zoom account, Teams, or even something like SurveyMonkey. All of those systems are really important at the moment during this online learning provision. The Learner Assistance Fund, so that might include books, class materials, could be support with rent or the utility bills, food, essential travel, childcare costs, medical costs. So they're really important areas to support those learners who, as we all know, it's very difficult to even try and engage in learning if you haven't got your basic needs met. And many of our learners are struggling every day with these essential things. So it's great to have that support system in place. Outreach and or mentoring. So that will include things like awareness raising, services to promote re-engagement. So I know, for example, working on the ground previously myself, where you might literally call door to door, knocking in the local community, and meeting with families and meeting with learners. So, you know, it's funding to provide things like that. Perhaps you want to engage in a promotional campaign on social media, develop materials or videos for that. You know, think of creative ways to reach out to people. Sending things in the post, for example, was a great piece of work that was done last year as well. People sent materials. And then the COVID-19 Recovery Exceptional Circumstances. So there's many different things that you might come up with underneath that. And I think it's important, even from the get-go, to sit down with your staff team and with your learners and think about, like, what is the situation that we have, what are our needs, and how do those needs fit underneath these different categories, and how can we frame them correctly. So here's just an example of part of the form. The form that I have seen, obviously they could be slightly amended in the different ETBs, but the one that I've seen is 5 pages long, which is quite a short form in relation to funding in general. And, you know, that's quite a positive thing. And the different areas there, you can see, like, you'll provide an outline of your proposed project. So you can think about framing the work that you want to do within a project framework, which will help you. So what's the timeline of the project? What's the aim, the objectives? Who are your target groups? And what different activities will you conduct as part of that project? And how will you measure the impact of that? And that's a really important part. You have to be strategic and very carefully organized as part of this work, and think about it like that. And that's what AONTAS is here for. We can help you with all of that, of course. And I know many of you are obviously hugely experienced in that area, but just for people who might be new to that. And it'll go through the different boxes. So, you know, are you applying for funding underneath digital technologies, etc. Now, generally speaking, you should be able to apply for funding underneath all the different categories. It's not a case of where you can only apply for digital technologies. And I think it's good to say as well, as don't think that, you know, by applying for a small amount of funding that you'll have a better chance of being successful. What we could see last year is that was certainly not the case. It's about you showing that what you're doing is really meaningful, authentic, and supporting disadvantaged learners. So don't be afraid to apply for large amounts of funding. It's also important here just to think about how the different key headings are important. And as I was saying, if you sit down and you kind of make even like a mind map and think about the needs and the experiences, the context that you're in, all of those kind of things come together. Then when you make your application, you'll think, well, we've already actually thought part of this through. So some of the key headings are Please provide information demonstrating how this funding intends to mitigate against educational disadvantage for the cohort you're working with. Please outline how the funding can complement and/or enhance the current provision of similar education in the area. Please clarify how the funding will support your learners to achieve positive outcomes as a result of this support. How will the benefits of this funding be measured? So as you can see, the research that we did on that last year helped us to advocate for a new funding stream, and that will be the same for you. If you're really successful in implementing this fund and you've carefully monitored that and you can show the impact that will stand to you going forward. Please provide information on how this project represents value for money and indicate what steps the project has taken to ensure avoiding duplication with existing services in the area. So they're kind of the key headings that I would think that you really need to think about. And that's where your mind maps and discussions come into play, because you know this stuff already. It's just about putting the pen to paper then. Conditions of the funding. So there are set out conditions of the funding that have been set by SOLAS with ETBI for the ETBs, but as I say, each ETB is independent in terms of delivering and monitoring the applications themselves and making those suggestions for approval to send on to SOLAS. So there might be slight amendments between them, but generally speaking, they will have similar conditions. And one of them I think that you could think about now to start with is the expenditure. So approved funding allocation for any project under the fund must be used for specific purposes intended. So for example, if you say we've applied and we're successful with €20,000 for digital technologies, and then you think, well, we actually got everything for 15,000 and we have 5,000 left, maybe we'll buy a printer. Oh, well, that's a bad example. That's also digital. Maybe we'll buy something else. It's not digital. A bus, a magic bus for under €5,000 with everything included. You can't do that, basically. It has to be for the specific purpose intended. It must be spent within 2021. So I know that was a big challenge last year, and I have to say a huge commendment to all the people. I know people literally worked through Christmas, both on the ground in the community groups, but also in the ETBs trying to get that across the line and in SOLAS. So thankfully this time around that won't happen, but you still need to make sure that all of your funding is spent in 2021. So in terms of that time frame for your project, make sure that your timeline will close before then, and give yourself enough time to be able to make your payments, have your invoices signed off, and make sure that all of your administration is organized so that it's less stressful for yourselves as well. And it can't be used for any pay costs or costs of a reoccurring nature, unfortunately. So they're kind of some of the conditions that I thought that would be good to flag. And in terms of that as well, maybe just think about making sure that you have your tax clearance certificates ready, bank account details, all of those sort of things that quite often people will leave until the last day, and then it's an absolute nightmare trying to get it organized. So just, start getting that stuff from the start, and identifying who's doing what, I think is always helpful. And then in terms of reviewing the application, so this is the guidelines that's been sent out to the ETBs themselves. Each ETB will review applications received using the funding criteria to determine which applications ought to be funded. Successful applications recommended by the ETB for funding must also be prioritised for funding consideration by SOLAS to ensure a fair disbursement of funding. The prioritisation will be used by SOLAS where funding requests exceeds the funds available. The following factors should be considered when reviewing applications of funding. So does the initiative have a clear and demonstrable educational outcome? Would funding this initiative result in the duplication of the work and funding of agencies whose specific remit is community development? So they don't want to, in a sense, create duplicating the same services, and for want of a better word, competition with your service. So if you're a community education group on the ground and you've been doing amazing work for the last 20 years, it's important that your services is funded to be able to keep delivering that amazing work that you've done, rather than someone else coming up with a new project that actually just duplicates what you're already doing. So it's just making sure that if you do come up with something new, that it's innovative and fresh, and it doesn't duplicate something else, or else it funds the great work that you're already doing. Would funding this initiative duplicate other SOLAS funding to the same organisation for the same purpose and/or same group of learners? It must demonstrate that the application for funding has been reviewed using the set criteria, and can the initiative outcomes be linked to beneficiaries on the PLSS system? Have you satisfied all governance requirements and assurances on how this funding would be spent if approved? So the governance and the financial regulations and the monitoring and tracking and measurement of the fund is really important as well. They're all the key kind of foundations for making sure that you are the best placed group to be able to take on this funding and to be able to deliver the work appropriately. So here's some of the key dates. Now we know we still have a few missing, and I think obviously there's a bit of a challenge because it's during the summer holidays, but we're getting more and more in each day, and these are all available on the AONTAS website. So we have a news piece up there, and we've been sending out emails. We're flooding your inbox lately, but we have a news piece up there. So if you keep an eye on that, if you haven't seen yours yet, we will update it. And obviously the most important place is to check your local ETB. And I suppose just to say that again, as Martha said, excuse me, the ETB is the main place where you will get the correct information for your specific funding. So AONTAS is here to support you, but it's your local ETB who will be able to clarify whether something would or would not be approved. And they'll be the people who set the deadlines and the criteria for your specific area. So you can see overall, there's kind of a range of different dates. Hopefully mostly are in the middle of September. The deadline that ETBs have to send it into SOLAS is September 24th. So they have to give themselves enough time to be able to get your application in, as well as all the others, review those applications and then decide who's being put forward to SOLAS for final approval then. So you can see Waterford and Wexford is the 17th, Cork is the 17th, Dublin, Dunleary, 17th, Kilkenny, Carlow, 13th, Limerick and Clare, 24th.
Dublin and Leary just clarified that they've changed their date to the 13th, Monday
the 13th. Oh, brilliant. Thanks so much. We'll update that. Louth and Meath is the 7th, Longford and Westmeath is the 10th, Galway and Roscommon is the 10th, and Donegal the 16th, Mayo, Sligo, Leitrim the 17th. Now, there could be discrepancies in those dates again. We probably need to check them again.
Just to Galway, Roscommon, sorry, is actually the 13th as well. It's
the 13th as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Perfect. That's really helpful. Thanks a million. And so in terms of AONTAS support, like, as I said, it's the local ETB who is the main person who can clarify and will be signing off on your funding application. AONTAS is not involved, apart from advocating for the funding and supporting you. We are just a support space and a representative space. We're not the people in charge of the funding. So it's really important that you link in with the adult education officer or the other appropriate person in your local ETB. But in saying that, we are here 100% to support you as much as we can. So as you know, we've been sending out emails. We're having the webinar today. This is recorded. It will be sent out with the presentations afterwards. We're also going to be providing individual support and feedback like we did last year. So please email me about anything that you want. I might not get back to you that day, but I will get back to you as soon as I can. My inbox was quite crazy last year, but it was really great to talk to everybody. So I will get back to you in a couple of days if I don't get back to you straight away. And in terms of that, like, we can just even have a conversation about what ideas you had, how you might phrase something. You know, if you're nervous about how you think something might be measured correctly, any of those sort of things, we can talk through that. I will also share with you, one of my colleagues, Aki, he put together a list of all the pieces that were successful in funding last year. So that might give you some ideas of what you might spend it on. And then we'll also be developing a frequently asked questions document. So anything that comes in, I'll put all of that together, and then hopefully that will help other people. And then just like last year as well, I'll track all of the different questions, feedback, challenges, and then what people are applying for, who is applying, any support that's needed, and we'll track all of that, and that will be used then to support the research for the following report from this. And it's also really important then for helping us to advocate for future funding as well. And then I'll also link in with SOLAS, ETBI and the department continuously during this process, so that if there's anything that we can get support with, we will, and we'll just let them know what the experiences of the different groups are. Yeah, so I think that that's kind of the main things on those points, but please don't hesitate to get in touch at all. That's what we're here for. But I think one of the key things of today now is passing on to Alwyn Dixon from Little Bray Family Resource Centre. So Alwyn is going to talk you through her experience of applying for the funding last year and the success they had and the impact it had, which is obviously the most important thing. So I'll pass you over to Alwyn now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That's all been so interesting. And in fact, a lot of stuff is really, you know, in some ways, with all the information that we've been given so far, a lot of the points have been touched on about last year's difficulties and how to overcome them and what's going to happen this year as well. So if I repeat anything you've already heard, sorry about that. But I'll just talk about our own experience. Yes, we found that because of the way the funding mechanism was set up last year and the very short time frame, it was quite stressful, both for the applying, receiving and spending the money. Obviously, you know, we've passed that point now, so I don't want to sound negative, but I am just referring back to what it was like at the time. Once we received the application form and the guidelines and knew what we were going to apply for, it was actually a simple enough process. We found the form straightforward and found them easy enough to complete once we knew what exactly it was we wanted to do. Going back to the very short time frame, we were informed that our application had been successful on the 9th of December, but we didn't receive the money into our account until the 23rd of December. So we had very little time to spend the money. There were no issues with drawing down the money. But we did, I have to say, get great support from the KWETB, which is our local ETB, in the process, and I'd just like to acknowledge that. So for future funding opportunities such as the one that's coming up now, we have got more time to organise. So that's a good thing. And maybe if it does occur again in 2022, we'll have even more time because, you know, it's going to be into September and by the time we get the money and everything. So it's kind of late enough in the year, but it is a huge improvement on what happened last year. The extended time frame is really positive. So for people applying for the first time, I just think the most important thing is to be clear about what you want and why. And this will help you when you're writing your application. Think about the needs of your learners, your target group, and what you need help with to make it happen, such as re-engaging with learners or encouraging people in for the first time. You will, as I think it was Dearbháil said, you need your tax cert number, your tax clearance cert, and if you have a charity number, you'll need that as well. So it's good to get all these things ready in advance and not be panicking at the last minute. We decided how to decide what to apply for. Well, that you obviously have your own needs, but you can, it's very useful to have discussions with other people because things can come up that mightn't have occurred to you. Like today now, for example, we've been hearing about what was applied for the last time and some suggestions as to what might fit under the categories this time. And there was an AONTAS webinar before the last round of funding, and I found that really, really useful, and it helped to sort of clear your head and try to figure out what you wanted to apply for. We applied under two of the categories, the digital technologies and the COVID-19 exceptional circumstances. Because of the digital poverty and the digital divide, we found that there were people in need of a laptop loan scheme for various reasons, and it really made a difference, and we found that very, very good. We also applied for a Zoom license because we didn't have the money for a Zoom license. We just used the free Zoom. But I mean, that wasn't long enough if you wanted to run anything on Zoom. Under the exceptional circumstances, we got things like antibacterial desk mats, which we found really good. Individual stacking desks, which was great for social distancing. We just wanted to increase the safety for anyone we were engaging with, as well as the staff, of course. And it was all about trying to keep everybody as safe as possible and to plan for the return of people into the centre, as well as obviously having to do blended learning and learning online. This time, I haven't actually seen, this is the first time I've heard anything about what's available this time in the categories, which is from yourself, Dearbháil, because we haven't yet. We have had contact from the ETB. We haven't received the application form or the guidelines, so we weren't quite sure what direction to go in. But certainly we would be looking at things like class materials, outreach and engagement, online capacity building, probably, you know, reapplying for another Zoom license, maybe some equipment to help with outdoor learning and activities, to create more learning spaces, because I don't think there's going to be a sort of a day that will come when everything is going to be normal. I mean, we really don't know over the next while. If we do get back inside and have classes running, you know, it's possible that there might be another outbreak or a surge, and nobody really knows. So we might have to, for a while, be prepared to use blended learning or learning of different types. And so we might need an outdoor space, but obviously a covered outdoor space. So we're looking at something like that, just so we'll have the capacity to keep on and won't have to close down. So that's really all I can say. It was quite stressful because of the time frame, but it was a very positive experience for us, and we did find that we got great support from our ETB, and also that the application process was straightforward, and you know, once you were clear about what you wanted, it was quite easy to do. So that's really all I can say. I hope it's been of some help, and we're looking forward to getting our hands on the information and starting to plan for this one. And the best of luck to everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Owen. That's absolutely perfect. Great to have all that different experience as well, and suggestions from what you were successful with. And I think that was another really big thing to say, was the health and safety equipment was a huge win for people last year, and really important, obviously. So I think that's something that people should definitely consider this year as well, and maybe look at what other centres have done in terms of innovative ways to make sure that they can protect the health and safety as much as possible of the learners and the staff as well. Just in terms of sharing the questions now, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go into breakout rooms just for 10 minutes because we're running over time, which was probably my fault, because as I said before, I'm a total waffler, so I apologize. So when you go into your breakout room, you'll have an AONTAS staff member there with you, potentially two, to facilitate and take notes. Please put everything on the table. We won't get to share everything afterwards because of the time frame. We're going to finish it around 3:15, but I will read through all of those afterwards, and I will get back to everybody. So please share your email address and any questions or concerns you have, and any questions for support that you need or anything like that. So the discussion questions are: did you apply for the fund last year? Will you apply for the fund this year? Do you have any questions about the fund? And is there anything we might be able to support you with? So we're really just trying to kind of get all that information together to help us all moving forward. So Barry, our tech genius, is going to put us into the breakout rooms now, and we'll see you all in 10 minutes. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we had a really good discussion. A lot of people had applied for the fund previously and were interested in applying again this year. One of the group had not been successful and had a few questions about that, and was looking for feedback, so we'll follow up on that. And then, yeah, I think digital technology was really the largest category that people were successful in, and outreach as well was something that was really, the fund was really used towards. An important point I think that was raised by the group was that around outreach, maybe there's a bit of a campaign to be done around making learners aware that face-to-face learning is happening again and is taking place, and a bit of trust. There's a piece around trust with that as well for maybe the older learners who would like to engage in face-to-face learning, that basically they're aware it's happening and they feel safe to do that. So I think that was a really interesting and important point. So that was our group.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eve. And a quick point on that, actually, AONTAS's website information and referral service, One Step Up, Sam, who leads that work, has actually just developed a new page called Returning to Learning. So that is going to be a space where learners, you know, or potential learners coming in might just kind of get a picture of what it might look like coming into education, either for the first time during COVID or returning, to try and help alleviate some of that stress and anxiety there as well. That's really helpful. Thanks a million, Eve. In room 2, we had Kellyanne and Suzanne.
Thanks a million, Dearbháil, and my apologies to my group. We got cut off mid-sentence there, but I'll definitely pass on all the questions, the specific questions that we had after the webinar. But yeah, we had a really, really great conversation. We had 2 members from 2 groups who had applied for the fund and were successful last year. So both of them spoke to kind of the experience of accessing the fund last year. And both of them were overwhelmingly positive. I think they spoke very highly of both of them access through digital skills and kind of the real benefits it had to learners. And there were some questions around how to use the fund for kind of looking at re-engagement. And we actually also had a representative from Solus in the group who was mentioning that Solus are really focused on kind of learner outreach and engagement following the unfortunate drop in engagement due to COVID-19. So that is one area of the fund that they really like to focus on, and there will be kind of comms campaigns and stuff kind of informing people of that coming up. Other than that, there were some specific questions about what people can apply for and what people would be applying for this year. Another thing that said that the categories of the fund are quite broad, and that is purposeful. So there were kind of questions around, how many laptops can I apply for example? And the kind of answer we came to is that the important thing is kind of really focusing on the kind of needs that you'll have in your application. So as long as you kind of put forward the case for what you're applying for and the impact it will have on learners and on your organization, that's the best way to ensure that you get what you need. So that was kind of the overall from our group.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kellyanne, and very well said yourself, so I don't need to comment on that. Thank you so much. In room 3, we had Sam and Martha. So one of you might come on there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dearbháil. We had a really interesting conversation as well, and most of our group, most of the people in our group did apply last year, got the funding, and will apply as well this year. Minority didn't apply last year because they were not aware of the funding, but they are really interested in applying this year, so they probably will. And we had a few questions raised about the funding, which we will help to find out the answers, and they are all related to transport. So if that could be included, which is really a good point. So if people could include somehow from community ed or personal costs for transport, once we will be able to attend live courses again. And the last main point, which was really, really interesting, is that there was no funding to support mentoring. So that's very important because during COVID, that was one of the main things that helped to support learners. So the main question is that what can we do in the future to make sure that it will be included in next funding.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marcia. Yeah, it's a really good point there on the mentoring. I think that probably comes back to the staff costs and the need for sustainable funding for the sector in general, but it's a really good point. And I think with the transport, there is underneath the Learner Assistance Fund room to be able to provide support for transport. But without knowing the specific details here, we can follow up with that because that's really helpful. Yeah. Thanks a million, Martha.
Yeah,
in room 4, we had Joan and Suzanne Kerr.
Hi there. We had a really interesting discussion as well in our room. And one point that came out very clearly from pretty much everybody was the distinction between capital and non-capital funding, and the fact that pretty much everybody needs actual feet on the ground, and not so much the digital help going forward this year. Also, there was one group that would have been really interested in acquiring funding for re-engagement with QQI. So it all came back to people, really. And most of the groups that we hadn't applied for the fund last year, but were really interested in finding out about doing it this year, and had some more questions to follow up with us. So I'll show them.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. Really helpful points, and we will definitely follow up with everybody. And I think, as you say, the most important resource that we have in the sector is the people. So I think we know that for sure. And it's always good to reaffirm that as well. In room 5, we had Orla and Laura.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So within our conversation, we had an administrative perspective. So we kind of discussed different lessons that were taken last year, such as there is additional support needed for the application process and a better understanding needed surrounding public procurement processes, which would better help them to understand how to submit a complete application for the best chance of success. So how that's kind of being addressed is, checklists have been provided and more communication is being developed to address those points. And then the second thing we kind of discussed was evolved funding needs. So the situation we were collectively involved in last year has evolved, and just the point was raised that it's important to make sure that availing of funding now is not going to jeopardize funding that has already been achieved or secured under different programs within the last year, and needing to make sure that the possibilities for funding integration is up to date with the circumstances we find ourselves in today versus last year. Those are the kind of two main points that were raised.
Thank you so much, Orla. Really practical points, definitely worthwhile for everybody to learn more about those areas. And I like the concept of the evolved funding needs. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Orla. In room 6, we had John or Emma.
Thanks, Dearbháil. Yeah, we had a great conversation in our room. Yeah, most but not all had applied for the fund last year. One member said that they just, they felt encouraged by all the ideas today and would likely then apply this year. And then most of the other comments made, I think, would really just be useful for us at AONTAS to put into like an FAQs document or somewhere so that we have it clear for members to reflect back on. So some of the questions or items raised were around mentoring engagement, like Marta had mentioned there, I think. So any ideas on what you might apply for under that heading of mentoring and engagement. Also, is there a maximum spending limit, and just clarity on this, the maximum spending limit, and also clarity on the requirement for quotes when items might be over a value threshold, so whether or not that threshold is €1,000. Just to get that clear, because I definitely haven't made it clear there how I've phrased it. And then also, is there any way to see the range of things that people are applying for? Maybe that would be a useful thing as well for us to include in our FAQs. And that's it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. Loads to add to the FAQs there. I have an empty spreadsheet waiting to be filled, and we will send out all those FAQs as soon as we can. So just, I suppose, to wrap up, thank you so much for everybody coming today, and thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Alwyn, to Claire, to Martha, to Eve. It's great to have everybody here today. Please do not hesitate at all to get in touch. We will do everything we can to support you. And obviously it's really important that everybody here collectively supports each other. So it's great to be able to share those resources. And if anybody would like to share their successful application form from last year to be able to help other groups, please let us know. We can even remove the name if that would help. And also plug again for Eve's and Suzanne's focus group coming up this Friday. Please do get in touch and attend that focus group, because as I said, the research helps us to be able to advocate for sustainable funding going into the future. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much. And next week as well, we will have another session on returning to learning. So the webinar next Wednesday will specifically focus on the government guidelines for reopening, and we will try to answer what questions we can, share the information we can, and also it's a space for the groups, for all of you to help each other, because obviously people have built up a huge capacity and expertise from all the work that's undertaken so far during the pandemic. So it's great to share that with each other as well. So if you can, join us next week at 2 o'clock, and I promise I'll be better at the timekeeping. And have a lovely afternoon. Thanks everyone. Bye.